everyone, welcome back to my channel and welcome to day 6 of 13 days of Halloween. I'm Erin, and for today's video we are going to be talking about the silent twins. On April 11th, 1963, Gloria and Aubrey Gibbons gave birth to 2 twin girls. They named them June and Jennifer. Now, Gloria and Aubrey were originally from Barbados, but the girls were born in Aden, which is a city that is found in Yemen, or in the Middle East. Shortly after the girls were born, Gloria and Aubrey decided that they were going to move, so they ended up moving to Haverfordwest in Wales. Now, when it comes to twins, we've all heard of the bond that they tend to have with one another, especially identical twins. There seems to be, that twin spidey sense between them. Even fraternal twins seem to have it as well. It's just a twin thing. It's almost kind of like they have a supernatural bond between each other. Now, as June and Jennifer began to get older, they started to display some bizarre behavior between the two of them. Now, this bizarre behavior started around the time when they started facing hardships where they lived in Wales. And most of this was due to their race, and the majority of where they were experiencing these hardships were at school. In fact, the bullying and discrimination towards June and Jennifer was so bad that the administration of the school would let them leave before the rest of the children would go so that they wouldn't have any issues on their way home from school. As I said, this led to bizarre behavior between June and Jennifer. In fact, it started out with them only communicating with one another. June and Jennifer seemed to create their own language between the two of them that only they could understand. Now, their parents and others often thought that they were speaking in a made-up language, but it actually turned out that they were speaking English. It just turned out that it was real sped-up English, and they also had a speech impediment, so that also made it more difficult to understand them. So their language was pretty much sped up English that you couldn't understand due to their speech impediment. So obviously the parents as well as teachers and such began to realize that there was quite a toxic relationship developing between June and Jennifer, and that they would only speak with one another, and they thought that maybe it would be best to try to split the girls up. However, this ultimately turned out to be a big mistake. What ended up happening was they ended up sending June and Jennifer to 2 separate boarding schools. So when they actually sent the girls to the 2 separate schools, they both stopped speaking and almost seemed to go into a catatonic state. Obviously, the staff at schools realized that this was not a good thing to have these girls separated, and the state that they were in where they weren't speaking at all and almost walking around like zombies. So eventually the girls were unified back together. Now, once the girls became reunited, their bizarre behavior continued, and they actually became even more attached to each other than they had before. The 2 girls ended up retreating to their bedroom, where they never left. So the girls ended up retreating to their bedroom, where they often refused to leave, even for meals. While confining themselves to their rooms, this is when the girls' imaginations started running wild. And their use of their imagination seemed to create their own world in such a small space. So an example of what they were doing while using their imagination in their bedroom was that they would give their dolls names, which in and of itself, that's not odd. However, after naming the dolls, the girls would create these complicated stories about each of the dolls. These stories would often end with the demise of the dolls, and the girls even went as far as to write their cause of death in a notebook. Now, during this time when June and Jennifer had retreated to their bedroom, they actually shared a bedroom with their younger sister, Rose. Now, the twins were still not communicating with anybody but themselves. However, since Rose was in their bedroom with them, they did communicate with her, and Rose even seemed to understand their language and be able to speak to them in it. Now, eventually, as Rose got older, she ended up moving into her own room, and when she did move into her own room, the communication with the twins ceased. They went back to just speaking to one another and nobody else. Now, the girls always seemed to be inseparable and always want to be around each other, but eventually their attitudes toward one another began to change. Now, around the age of 16 is when the girls began writing in their diaries about how they no longer felt comfort in one another. In one of these diary entries, Jennifer chillingly wrote, "We have become fatal enemies in each other's eyes. We feel the irritating, deadly rays come out of our bodies, stinging each other's skin. I say to myself, can I get rid of my own shadow? Impossible or not possible. Without my shadow, would I die? Without my shadow, would I gain life, be free, or left to die? Without my shadow, which I identify with the face of misery, deception, murder. Here's what June expressed in one entry. We are both holding each other back. There is a murderous gleam in her eye. Dear Lord, I am scared of her. She is not normal. She is having a nervous breakdown. Someone is driving her insane. It is me. This is where things with the girls started to turn obviously more toward the darker and sinister side. Around this age, the girls also began to write novels. This is actually what the girls wanted to do as a profession. They wanted to be professional authors. However, these novels were often seen as dark and strange. Now, these dark fantasies that they were writing about also led to dark behaviors. Around the age of 18, Jennifer and June actually met another set of twins that were from America. The two sets of twins started to party and do drugs with one another. Now, obviously, at the end of the summer, the boys had to go back to the United States, and this really upset the girls, and they actually decided to take out their anger on society. Jennifer and June soon began to commit crimes. The girls began to break into houses, smash windows, and worst of all, they began setting things on fire. The girls actually set a large store on fire, and the only reason that they were caught was because of a diary entry that one of them had made. After the girls were caught, they were arrested and they were actually sentenced to go to a psychiatric hospital, which was called Broadmoor Hospital. While they were at Broadmoor, they continued to display their bizarre behavior. Obviously, while at the psychiatric hospital, the girls had been separated, and this is where the hospital staff began to see the strange behavior between the two girls. It was almost as if they would take turns eating even though they weren't near each other. So one girl would completely gorge herself with food while the other one would be essentially starving herself. And then they'd switch. Keep in mind, like I said, they are being kept in separate rooms at the time and didn't have contact with one another. So how did one know that one was eating and the other one should starve themselves, and then when they should switch? Another bizarre thing would be that doctors and nurses would go into their room, or pretty much their cell, and they would find them frozen in these strange positions. Now, what was so strange about this is that the other twin would be frozen in the exact same position in a different part of this hospital. The girls also seemed to know what the other was doing or feeling at any given time. This behavior continued for the 11 years that the girls were contained in Broadmoor Hospital. It was almost as if the girls were one person instead of two different people. It was during this time in Broadmoor Hospital when the girls began to feel that in order for them to live a normal life, one of them was going to have to die. Eventually, the girls were allowed to have contact with one another, and during their time at Broadmoor, they actually became acquainted with a reporter for the London Sunday Times. Her name was Marjorie Wallace. Now, the girls became quite close with Marjorie, and they began to confide in her. The girls expressed to Marjorie, as well as in their diaries, that in order to be freed, they would have to sever their bond with one another. And they said that the only way that this bond could be severed was if one of them died. After spending 11 years in Broadmoor Hospital, which was a high-security psychiatric hospital, the girls were transferred to a low-security clinic that was known as the Casewell Clinic. They were transferred to this clinic in 1993. Now, Wallace claims that on the day that they were to be transferred to the Casewell Clinic, that Jennifer approached her and stated, "I'm going to have to die. We've decided." Now, allegedly on the drive to the new clinic, Jennifer looked as if she was in a trance. Upon their arrival to Casewell Clinic, Jennifer crumpled on the floor for no apparent reason. It is said that she supposedly laid her head on June's lap and died. June would later state that Jennifer's last words were, "At long last, we're out." Now, Jennifer died of acute myocarditis, which is a sudden inflammation of the heart. Now, this is odd that she would die of such a thing, because Jennifer was in good health, she was young, and she had absolutely no history of heart issues. When the autopsy was performed on her, they also noted that no drugs, alcohol, or poison were found in her system. Now, what's so bizarre about after Jennifer's death is that June actually did seem to become, quote-unquote, better after she had passed away. She began to speak normally, and she also began to speak with other people. In fact, she did so well that she would eventually be released from the psychiatric facility and actually went on to live a fairly normal life. Now, keep in mind, the girls, when they were committed to this psychiatric hospital, this was their sentence for their crimes that they had committed. And the twins' family were actually very upset about the sentence. They held a lot of resentment over the girls being committed to Broadmoor, and they claim that that imprisonment is what ultimately led to Jennifer's death. Today, June continues to live a quiet life in Wales. June actually wrote a very haunting poem that was included on Jennifer's headstone, and this is what it read. "We once were two, we two made one. We no more two, though life be one. Rest in peace." I think that's definitely a very eerie poem to have on there. So, what do you think? Do you think that these two twins actually did have some kind of supernatural bond that actually linked the two of them together? Obviously, like I said, twins tend to have that twin spidey sense, but I feel like this one is to the extreme and is definitely very creepy. I think what's even creepier is that the two girls had decided ultimately that one of them was going to have to die in order for the other one to be free. So what started off as a relationship where they loved one another and they were so attached to each other actually began to turn into something sinister where they actually began to resent one another. And then ultimately led to that conclusion that one of them was going to have to die in order for the other one to live a normal life. Definitely a very, very strange case to me. But that is it for this video, guys. If you liked it, please give me a big old thumbs up. If you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, hit that subscribe button down below as well as the notification bell. I will be posting videos every day right up until Halloween. I'll catch you guys tomorrow. Bye!